Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Naya Bricker. We're just going to take a moment and let everyone get connected to this webinar. We're so glad that you joined us. I might repeat myself a few times, so just bear with me as you get connected. Welcome. We're so glad that you're here. I can see all of our attendees connecting to Zoom right now. The audience numbers going up just as expected. We're so glad you're here. Welcome to our third event in our spring Opening to Wonder conversations, I should say. I'm just going to go over some housekeeping tips, nothing too complicated. This is a Zoom webinar, which means that you do not have to worry about your video, your camera, or your microphone. All you have to worry about is the chat and the Q&A. Those are both tools you can use to communicate with our panelists. They're located around the edge of your screen, and I invite you to locate the chat button now. And if you feel like it, share where you're based right now. Where are you zooming in from? And I will read them out to let our panelists know our audience base and our geographies, and just get a sense of how far we're spread out. I'll give you a moment to sort that through. I can see they're coming in now. Excellent. And then the Q&A. The Q&A is the icon with the two dialogue bubbles. You can use that to ask questions. Use it at any point throughout the event. I direct questions there just so we don't get them lost in the chat, but feel free to use it towards the end. That's when we'll be answering questions after our presentation. And let's see where we're all tuning in from. We have Truro, Mass, New Haven, Connecticut. That's Valentina. We've got Providence, Rhode Island, Santa Barbara at the Rusty Barn Studio and Workshop, Los Angeles, California, New York City. Okay, we've got coast to coast. That's exciting. If anyone else feels like typing, go for it. Otherwise, I will give my last piece of housekeeping. Zoom troubleshooting, disconnection, all of those things, audio issues. If you have any trouble with the video quality, with the sound quality, please message me through the chat or send me an email. You have my email through the registration link. If you need to leave the webinar and come back into the webinar, not a problem. Just go back to your inbox and click on the Zoom link. It'll let you right back in. And then if you need to leave the event early, we'll be sad to see you go, but please know that it will be recorded and I will send you a link to the recording just as soon as I've edited it. So without any further ado, I see we've got someone joining us from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Welcome, welcome everyone. I'm going to pass the mic virtually over to my colleague, Kelly Groom, our Director of Education Programs.
Hey, Naya, welcome to Opening to Wonder. I'm Kelly Groom. Thank you so much for joining us and supporting the Fine Arts Work Center. Tonight, we are thrilled to host Dwayne Slick and Martin Smick's conversation, My Teacher is a Lizard, on collaboration and legacies of wonder. Opening to Wonder was created in 2020 as a virtual series of conversations on the creative process to help keep our community connected and to provide crucial support for the Work Center. All of our presenters are donating their time, giving a gift to the Work Center, which has been a gift to writers and artists for over 50 years. A special thank you to our spring advisory group who created our new series on the visual arts, Esteban Del Valle, Bert Yarborough, and Kate Clark, all of whom are Fine Arts Work Center fellows and members of the Visual Arts Fellowship Committee. Our Opening to Wonder advisors also appear as special guests throughout the series. And tonight we are very glad to have Esteban Del Valle with us to introduce our presenters. Thank you so much, Esteban.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Thank you, Naya. I'm very excited to introduce these two artists who I'm lucky enough to call friends and peers. Dwayne Slick is a former visual arts fellow. He first had his fellowship in 1990 to 91 and then 91 to 92. So he did 2 years. Dwayne is a painter whose prints and paintings blend subject of oral and visual indigenous traditions with a focus on trickster strategies and modernist, postmodernist painting histories. His black and white series of American flag-based paintings that were created in 2010 and 2012, The Untraceable Present, explored the contradictions and legacies of Native American identity in the narratives of American history. Slick was born in Waterloo, Iowa, and is of Native American descent, a member of the Meskwaki Nation of Iowa. He is the recent co-recipient of a grant from the Andrew Mellon Foundation with collaborator Martin Smick, a collaboration described as partnering with a third and silent partner, museum collections specific to Native American culture. Their Mellon project is titled, My Teacher is a Lizard, Decolonizing Curatorial Practice. He is a recipient of numerous grants, including the Joan Mitchell Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. His work is included in collections at the Des Moines Iowa Art Center, the Decordova Museum, and the Eiteljorg Museum, and the National Museum of the American Indian, among others. He serves as a Fine Arts Center board. He serves on the Fine Arts Work Center Board of Trustees. Dwayne also has a one-person show of recent work at the Eiteljorg Museum in Ridgefield, Connecticut, coming in early 2022. The exhibition is tentatively titled, The Coyote Makes the Sunset Better. Martin Smick is an artist whose multidisciplinary practice blends painting, printmaking, and installation to create layered and textual visual spaces. Most recently, Smick has taken part in a collaboration with artist Dwayne Slick in the partnership with the museum collections specific to Native American culture. In 2018, he was co-recipient with Slick of the grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to work with the collection of Brown University's Haffenreffer Museum of Anthropology. Smick is the recipient of a fellowship from the Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris, the SVA Studio Residency in New York, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. He received his MFA in 2009 and continues to live and work in Providence, Rhode Island. I was fortunate enough to be in grad school with Martin. We were the same year. And we had this great mentor, Dwayne, who taught us the ways of art and school and academia, and was an incredible mentor that we all became close during that time period. It was Dwayne who actually introduced me, and I believe Martin as well, to the Fine Arts Work Center. And this was back when you used to have to take your work in person if you were a finalist. So I have really great memories of Dwayne helping us get everybody together who applied, who were finalists, and making this road trip and spending the day on the beach as the decision was made as to whether we got in. I was rejected 4 times, but it eventually worked out. And so I'm really excited to have both these people here. Thank you, Martin and Dwayne, for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Esteban. That was a very lovely introduction. Dwayne, you want me to begin here?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, well, I want to start by just thanking all of the attendees. I see a lot of familiar names, and I really want to thank you all for being here and allowing us to share this project with you. I want to thank the FALC for inviting us as well. And also want to thank the Haffenreffer Museum for allowing us to work in their collections. So what we're going to talk about this evening is a project that Esteban just mentioned in our bios. We received a grant in 2018 from the Mellon Foundation to work inside the Haffenreffer Museum collection. And this was part of a collaboration between the RISD Museum and the Haffenreffer Museum called the Assemblages Project, with a focus specifically on object-based learning. So how, as teachers, we can introduce artists to museum objects as a primary source for teaching and learning. You want to add anything to that, Dwayne?
No, that sounds good. Sounds good.
So I'm going to start by sharing just sort of a first slide that.
Actually, I do have one thing.
Sure.
This is actually our second collaboration. Our first one was with the Fruitlands Museum in Harvard, Mass. And this was our second collaboration.
The second of 2 collaborations, and hopefully more to come. So the exhibition itself took place in 2018, and this was after about a year spent visiting the collection itself, which is it's in Bristol, Rhode Island. Just a word briefly about the collections themselves. The Native American archaeological and ethnographic collections at the Haffenreffer were the collections of Rudolf Haffenreffer, who was an American industrialist and philanthropist and a beer baron, I would say. So he was the owner of Narragansett Beer. And he had a deep interest in the history of Native American culture in the region. So in 1903, he purchased the property as kind of a summer farm down in Bristol, Rhode Island, where the museum now resides. And it's actually a particularly important historical place. Mount Hope was central to the history of relations between the early English colonists and the Wampanoag people of southern New England. And it is where King Philip's War began in 1675 and ended in 1676 with the killing of Metacom, or King Philip. And actually that was the subject of our first exhibition together. So after his death in 1955, Rudolf Haffenreffer's family donated the museum to Brown University, which, unlike its other Ivy League counterparts, at that point did not have a department of anthropology. So this collection really was sort of beginning of that department at Brown. As I said, we spent, we probably went down there once or twice a month, right?
Yeah.
During the year. So we're going to start with a video of our first trips down to the museum. And in order to do that, I have to stop.
Yeah, the video is titled, was part of the exhibition, but titled Honoring the Makers. This is, yeah, just to give you an idea of like, you know, the Haffenreffer has how many objects? Over 1 million.
Over 1 million objects, archaeological and ethnographic material. Culture.
Yeah, and yeah, and 95, 99% of it indigenous art.
As we play the video, we're going to stop it selectively in order to identify some of the objects that you're seeing as that figures into the exhibition when we show the slides from the exhibition. The video has no sound until the end. So if you're not hearing sound, you don't need to worry.
Don't panic.
So I'll pause right here and just identify for you, this is a Birch Bark Box. The maker is unknown, and it is from the Ojibwe tribe, and it is adorned with porcupine quills.
Yeah, they call them quill boxes. So yeah, it's all just porcupine quills on birch bark. This would be an example of the kind of like woodland designs. So all of this is quill work onto the baskets. So these are tiny teepees made for the tourist market on the different reservations. You'll get an idea of, you know, these are actually in cabinets. And then there are shelves, and all of these, you know, it's just a massive collection. And these are more kinds of woodland designs, baskets. What was interesting to learn was that the majority of them were actually materials are sourced by women, and then the baskets were made by the women, but the kind of like the images and the inscriptions were finished by the men.
So this cabinet has objects from Arctic communities, mainly Inuit, and these are marine ivory and you know, whalebone sculpted objects, and they will also figure into our discussion later.
Was this like petrified whalebone?
Yeah, semi-fossilized. So while we were looking through all the shelves, all of a sudden we saw this one shelf with these masks with European faces on them, and we had questions. And we learned that these particular masks are from a traditional folkloric dance that has its origins in Guatemala. The dance itself is called the Baile de la Conquista, or the Dance of the Conquest. And it's a reenactment of the invasion led by the Spanish conquistador Pedro de Alvarado and his confrontation with Tecún Umán, who's the ruler of the Quiche kingdom. Although the dance is associated with Guatemalan tradition, it has been performed by early colonial regions of Latin America at the urging of the Catholic friars and priests as a method of converting various native populations to Catholicism.
Yeah, this comes back in some of the later images, particularly when we start talking about the 3D scans. Another kind of issue is the way things are put into shelves here. We've got the masks on the top level, and the bottom level would be like these Hopi katsinas. So, you know, I was calling it the object collision. I believe that many of the objects like that were considered sort of secular are not in those shelves. They were not on display.
So this is the final object in this video, and it is of the objects that we profile in our exhibition. It's the only one with a known artist or maker. It was made by Daisy Mattensaw, who is Kiowa, and it is a cradle board. Dates to 1900, and the materials involved are wood, deerskin, metal, glass beads, and cotton canvas. Did you want to add anything to that, Dwayne?
Yeah, we'll have a few later images just for context on this cradle board.
Yeah. Sound should come in about now. So at this point, we're going to transition to our slides. So if you just bear with me for a moment here. So as mentioned before, the exhibition was the result of this year-long collaboration, and it took place in 2 locations, the John Hay Library at Brown University and the Memorial Hall Gallery at Rhode Island School of Design. Dwayne, my teacher is a lizard. I seem to remember you coming up with that title.
Yes, this was, we were trying to come up with a title, and because of the kind of, the initiative of the Mellon Grant was pedagogical. And so I was thinking, also in relationship to what we were encountering in the museum collections. Thinking about this just kept coming to mind. This book called The Way was published in the early 70s as part of a kind of literary revival, or literary, it's sort of like the first time America had discovered that there are a lot of indigenous writers in this country. This was an anthology of American Indian literature, but it was in my mother's collection, her library collection. And so I grew up reading this book, over and over again. And I would always come back to this poem, My Teacher is a Lizard. But it's also the heading for a chapter on education and culture. And this is a lizard. I was telling Martin, it's for our next presentation. It's called My Senator is a Lizard. But here's My Teacher is a Lizard. I tried to find Mary Lynn Blackburn online. I was doing Google searches. I couldn't find her, so I'm not quite sure which nation she belongs to. But it reads, Mr. Gordon is a lizard. Mr. Gordon was a man at one time, and he was so mean that he turned into a lizard. He went to school. Everybody laughed at him. He went to his house and looked in a mirror and laughed in lizard talk. Chris is our teacher's aide, and she's just a year old, and she is funny. I think she's going to be a lizard too. With 2 lizards in the room, it's going to be funny. It's going to be hard to learn.
So as I mentioned, the exhibition took place in 2 locations. One of the issues when we first thought about having an exhibition was, how might we be able to display selected objects? And it was determined that we wouldn't be able to do that at RISD because RISD didn't have the ability to
Ensure.
insure and house these objects on site. They're very fragile and delicate. We didn't have the cases or any of that. So instead, we chose to have the exhibition take place in 2 locations and took these selected objects from that video and highlighted them in some cases. And just for context, this is what a cradle board would have been used for. This is from a book that features these cradle boards as yeah. So this is so there were 2 cases at the John Hay Library. This case has a carved mask, an Inuit carved mask made of whalebone or fossilized whalebone. Dates to the 20th century, unknown maker. The Birch Bark Box, again, unknown maker. And the carved man with wings from Inuit of Canada, also an unknown maker.
One of the ideas we were talking about when we began to really explore these 3D scanners was using the scans as a substitute for the actual objects, off-site from the museum. And that was before the option to display the actual things had come up. And the Haffenreffer was interested in how the scans might work, right, Martin?
Right.
So,
yeah, they had not done a whole lot in terms of scanning objects in their collection. And I think because 3D scanning is still sort of an evolving technology, there wasn't a whole lot of that had been done in that regard. So this became an interesting way for us. The idea of a 3D scan was an interesting way to sort of allow the objects to have presence in our exhibition without actually being there. What we learned was that the scanners are fickle and they like certain things and they don't like other things. Among the original objects that we were interested in at the museum were a collection of Kashinawa headdresses, feathered headdresses. But it turned out that these scanners just have a lot of difficulty interpreting feathers. And they're a little too unwieldy as objects. And so part of our rationale for choosing these more textured whalebone objects had to do with the fact that they were a bit more compact and that they were a little bit easier for the scanning technology to detect. The other reason we focused on these particular objects was, as Dwayne mentioned, there's sort of a pedagogical mission within this Mellon grant. And Dwayne actually had conceived of a class a number of years ago that involved working inside a museum, in particular the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and to sort of use a primary source object-based learning in a studio course with students. And he asked me to teach that, so I've been actually teaching that course for a number of years now. We sort of determined that introducing Inuit culture and subsistence whaling as a point of comparison with the New England whale fishery would be a way to expand our conversation on that history. And so it sort of fit very seamlessly into our larger idea to work with these particular objects, both in terms of the scanning and also in terms of the subject itself. Is that okay?
Next.
So here you have our students visiting the Haffenreffer. This is pre-COVID, obviously, and viewing a number of these objects on site. So we essentially had to enlist the help of our friends at the Haffenreffer, Registrar Don Kimbrell and one of their curators, Thierry Gentis, were a huge help to us in this effort. Transporting these objects was a lot of work. They're extremely delicate. There's kind of a trail of dust that seems to follow them every time they move.
They were crumbling as we scanned them.
Yeah, they were crumbling as we scanned them. So here we are at the RISD Nature Lab, where we are using what's called a scanner called the Arctex Spider. It's a very high resolution 3D scanner that both does a map of the object, and then using both a laser technology and it gets the sort of surface texture using a camera that's in the scanner that basically creates what's called a texture map that kind of wraps around the form that is scanned. These scans require usually multiple scans of one object, and then there is software built in to the scanner itself that is used to kind of stitch those multiple scans together in order to create a single uniform scanned object. So this is what one of the scans ultimately looked like. And this is from a 3D animation. So at the end, we're going to play some video from we had two monitors playing in our exhibition. One was playing the video you saw at the beginning. The other was playing these animations with these, using these 3D scans.
You get an idea here how the Arctic spider really, likes small solid objects and textures. So this is a very, very good scan, actually. This was, yeah. This one, can we go back to that real quick?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, the idea of this one was we used it in the poster, but we cropped out the sleeve somewhat, right? But it was just the idea, I just couldn't get past my associations of the Onceler from Dr. Seuss's Lorax, who only appears as gloved hands.
So on the left is the scan with the Arctex Spider. On the right is a less defined scan. So there's another scanner that we were using initially called an iPad scanner. And it's a much lower resolution scanner, but much more user-friendly, very mobile. So we were able to bring it down to the museum and use it on site. What we found is it wasn't great for really getting highly defined scans of objects, but it did prove to be useful in another capacity, and we'll get into that in a few moments. So here's a photograph from the exhibition itself at the Memorial Hall Gallery at RISD. In the foreground is the sort of wall when you first walk in, along with the monitor that contained the 3D animations. And then to the left is a collaborative piece, a hanging screen that I had made where I've taken an image from the scan and blown it up sort of a monumental scale. And then Dwayne is responsible for the orange sun figured in the back. Here's another view, first light text painting that I'll zoom in on in just a minute. That's one of Dwayne's paintings. The two screens are both mine. One is called Bittersweet Interloper, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. And then the large piece, the collaborative piece, I've Forgotten How to Dream, and that's actually a reference to both to some of the paintings that Dwayne was making, and you'll see in the text the sort of reference to dreams. The title for me was also a reference to a film that we watched over the course of that year while we were working on this project. It was a 2015 film by Colombian director Ciro Guerra called Embrace of the Serpent, and it's based on the diaries of a German anthropologist. So the film follows the story of a character by the name of Karamakate, who's an Amazonian medicine man and the last survivor of his people. And it's about his relationship with two scientists at different points in his life, one when he's young and one when he's older. And these scientists are both searching the Amazon for an elusive healing plant. At one point in the film, Karamakate tells a story of a dream he once had of a white spirit. And he said the spirit was so sick and the only way he could heal was by learning how to dream, but he couldn't. And that sort of triggered something for me in this idea of forgetting how to dream. So that's sort of the origin of that title. Dwayne, you want to talk about your?
Well, as you'll see in the presentation, there's, I think there's 5 of these kind of text paintings. And I don't know, as an indigenous person walking through these collections, it's like, it's hard not to kind of think about the people who made these things. As I've written in our statements, there's this idea that the brown hands that made these objects are now silenced or are silent or have been silenced. And so there's, it's hard not to kind of think about some of those issues or feel the weight of these cultures, because for me, for a lot, as coming from a woodlands tribe, it's I'm thinking about ancestors. And so the idea was to kind of create a voice within the exhibition, or a voice that was maybe responding to its situation. So it's a dream of the first light. What's the rest of it?
The light from the east.
The light from the east. Yeah, he switched. A dream of peace with a people not gone.
It's also worth noting that the orange sun is on the east wall of the gallery. Didn't we do that intentionally? I believe we did.
This became sort of like the poster text painting for the show. And we're going to talk about this in just a second, but a cannibal dreams of occupied land and a trophy land pipe. The people dream of the light in the red body that burns forever. The trophy land pipe is actually referring to the oil pipe. It's going through Lakota and Dakota land. That was happening at the time that we were putting the show together. And I don't know, people dream of the light in the red body that burns forever. It just seems like, we're just talking about 2 different value systems. Texture.
I threw in some details. You thought I should do that, right?
Yeah, I thought, just to get a sense of, the physicality of these, or unphysicality of the screen paintings.
Screens it's basically a vinyl window screen mesh that I've stenciled onto. So zooming out and sort of turning towards the north side of the gallery. Again, we have 2 more screens. On that far wall in the background is the monitor with the Honoring the Makers video. In the center is an empty vitrine with a mask mount. And then on those 3 shelves are digital prints from scans that we made in the
iPad scanner.
using the iPad scanner in the archives, and we'll explain more about those in a minute. So there you see the video. So as I mentioned before, the iPad scanner wasn't very useful for scanning individual objects. However, you're able to sort of put it on a setting for scanning architectural spaces. So we started doing these larger room scans where we were just scanning the shelves themselves, and started to yield some interesting results. That gives you a sense of what happens to those shelves when filtered through this particular scanner. The masks sort of take on a more disembodied state. Dwayne, you want to elaborate?
Yeah, and there are kinds of animations. We do have some animations.
Yeah.
Of taken with the iPad scanner. So you get a sense of how, the way an image is sort of like dissipates. I was kind of fascinated with the idea of the kind of contextless space.
Do you want to talk about the case as well, or maybe we can talk
Case?
about the museum case in a minute? Well, actually, there's another slide of it, so we'll go back into that.
Okay.
The particular motif that I seized on, as I mentioned, this land where the museum resides in Bristol is land that's sacred to the Wampanoag, and figures prominently in the history of the relations between English colonists and the Wampanoag. And so when I was down there, I was sort of struck by just the land itself and the woods. It's nothing like it would have been 300-400 years ago. And what figured prominently was this Asian bittersweet vine that sort of was introduced by Europeans in the 19th century. And if you've been to New England or live in New England, you're probably familiar with this particular plant. It's an ornamental, and it's kind of taken over the woods in the surrounding woodlands around the museum itself. So I sort of seized on this as a motif, this sort of invasive species, and tried to create, using the screen's sense of immersing oneself in that. And Dwayne helped me with the title, Two Uninvited Guests.
Where are we? Okay, we have more of these. Trophy hunters to the east are occupied with cannibal dreams, and I fear I am alone. In his war, this body will not survive. It is foolish to think there is no understanding. I was actually, cheating on this one. I was writing about Donald Trump. The light apart from the land, apart from the body, apart from the people is not gone.
So this is the other image of the museum case. Part of the idea here was to call attention to the institutional authority of the museum itself, and that kind of separates these objects from their makers, from their origins. Care to elaborate, Dwayne?
Yeah, unfortunately, inside is like a stand for holding a mask. It's the idea that there's an empty stand inside inside the case. But, you know, some of the RISD audience thought it was something akin to a Giacometti sculpture. But it was just, you know, who could not take this picture, because Martin's screen painting appears to be floating in there like a hologram. Okay, here we are. This is the section I titled "The Elders Have Something to Say." So what I did was I decided not to completely wing it. I actually wrote something out for you. So I'm gonna run it and roll into it. This is home, actually, back in Iowa, entering the Meskwaki Nation. And the gentleman standing there is named Jonathan Buffalo. He's our tribal historian. And I'm going to read this thing. It goes just like this. In this research process, we encountered the volume of objects and conditions of their storage. I termed it an object collision, where context and contextlessness unfold. It can be characterized as a deactivation of cultural objects, a separation that is followed by a looming sense of memorial. And within this, I resolved that the situation should not be the last word on a tribal people, at least not entirely those words, because we indigenous people are still here. And so in response to that silence of the object under the invasiveness of the Western voice, the academic narrative, and anthropological categorization, I took our 3D scans to Iowa, where I shared them with my Musquakis tribal elders, who are fluent speakers of the Meskwaki language. And my lead contact was tribal historian Jonathan Buffalo. I shared scans and animations from the Arctic spider, which were the Inuit whalebone owlbird the Inuit mask, and the Ojibwe quillwork basket. Then I shared the scans from the iPad, which were the objects floating on the shelves, or floating on floating shelves. The 3D scans were presented as animations of the objects rotating in virtual space, which we will play for you shortly, and prompted a discussion on the subject of physical interchange. The longer the videos played before these elders, the more engaged they became with them. And the first comment that was usually made was that they could not comment on another tribal nation's objects or art, but that the owl man carved from whalebone did represent some common ground. The subject of the piece, the whalebird man, was interpreted as physical interchange. And the idea of physical interchange was most likely rooted in the early oral mythologies of a time when humans, early Musquakis, could personify other forms of life. In the same way, this excerpted story I'm about to tell you is filled by all manner of being personified and testifying to the Earth Maker. So the story begins, in the beginning, Earth Maker gathered all beings on Earth, the rock people, the tree people, the wingeds, the ant people, the four-leggeds, and all manner of being was personified as half whatever it was and half human. And they came together to listen to the Earth Maker. When they had all gathered, Earth Maker told them a new creature was being made, and this new creature would be called the Meskwaki people. Earthmaker instructed all beings to give a gift to the Meskwaki people. And so the corn people stepped forward, and the corn people said, these new people, the Meskwaki people, can use our seed at the time of harvest for food. And the deer people stepped forward, our gift to the Meskwaki people. Well, we have two gifts for the Meskwaki people. They may have our flesh for food, for meat, so that they may live, and they may use our hides for clothing and shelter. And so the list goes on with different plants. and animals coming forward and talking about their purpose and their gift. So one of the points that Jonathan Buffalo brings up is the idea that Musquakis do not fear death. They fear the way they may die, but death itself is not feared. They do not believe in resurrection and eternal life as in the Christian faith, and that the process of reality of death is more a dissemination of energies and reincarnations. After death, the body cannot be resurrected and returns to the earth as the spirit or the essence. And yet, according to Jonathan Buffalo, the Musquakis love their monster movies as much as anyone else. The viability of certain Hollywood monsters is pure nonsense in their worldview. Dracula and the whole history of vampires, nonsense. Frankenstein, the unnatural, nonsense. Zombies, especially zombies, mildly entertaining yet metaphysically impossible because resurrection does not exist. However, in the pantheon of classic Hollywood monsters, there is one exception, and that was the werewolf. And so the Hollywood werewolves, be they Lon Chaney Jr., Jack Nicholson, Michael Landon as the original Teen Wolf, or Butch Patrick as Eddie Munster, among a few others, and I would add with a noted absence of female roles for werewolves, gives pause, P-A-U-S-E, because the existence of the werewolves, of the wolf, or the werewolf, or the wolf man, wolf woman, is consistent with the concept of physical interchange. And so Jonathan was telling me, in some of his meetings with folks, we're getting tours of the museum. He tells stories. This was one of the stories he enjoys to tell. And he says one of the things that constantly comes up is the follow-up question. If Musquakis don't fear death, what do they fear? And so that leads us to the next slide. At this point, now I'm off script. What we began to talk about was the idea of the Wendigo. Well, I have a script here. This is just to give you an idea. Here we go. Show them the chalkboard before we show them this. There we go. This was what I had made after I had returned from Iowa, after meeting with the Meskwaki tribal elders. And we called it the Wendigo playlist. And so let's go back to the definitions. Illustrates the living example of the creature named the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a cannibalistic creature and cultural metaphor for excessive consumption and self-aggrandizing greed. Out of equilibrium and estranged by the communities, individuals afflicted by the Wendigo spirit unravel and destroy the environmental balance around them. So, this is the point where I'm going, any questions? Now what?
We have a few final slides as
let's go back to the names, the list of names. We were installing the show, and our colleagues came in to get a sneak peek, and we were talking to them, describing to them the story of the Wendigo. One of the stories about Wendigos is that Well, let me read this. The earliest version of the Wendigo describes an evil spirit or demonic entity that was able to possess humans and even transform into human beings themselves. Those who had previously been driven to commit cannibalism as a desperate act of self-preservation during a harsh winter could be affected by the Wendigo spirit. And the malevolent spirit is driven by its insatiable hunger for human flesh. So, yeah, and then of course there's the idea that the Wendigo is a cultural metaphor for just self-aggrandizing greed and excessive consumption. So we explained this to my colleagues at RISD, and we gave them an opportunity to enter a name or two, so of folks that they thought were Wendigos. So there's a few in here that, you know, Martin Shkreli.
Yeah.
Who did, what did he do again?
He jacked prices on pharmaceuticals for people with pre-existing conditions and things, people who couldn't afford them. It's certain drugs that were very necessary for people in need were.
They were at one time almost like $10, and the prices went up to as high as $500.
Something along those lines, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, there's some of the usual folks: Christopher Columbus, Dick Cheney, Andrew Jackson.
We introduced some artists and some
EpiPens. Yeah, Vicky's listing. EpiPens is what Shkreli had jacked the price up on.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And he was unrepentant.
So I mean, these are different figures throughout history. Some of them are figures are even just characters, but all embodiments of the cultural metaphor of the Wendigo. And so we made a few slides for our talk, just with illustrations.
Oh, these are the Wendigos on the chalkboard.
Yeah.
We have
Go through the list.
Yeah. We have Putin, of course.
James Franco, RISD grad, Elon Musk, Kellyanne Conway, Ramsay Bolton from Game of Thrones, Dick Cheney. George Hay, you want to talk about George Hay?
Yeah, George Hay is the founder of the National Museum of the American Indian and was a plunderer, a shameless plunderer, who was quoted as saying he wasn't going to be happy acquiring, you know, cultural objects from Native communities until everybody was naked by the time he left.
You know, Newt Gingrich, George Custer, Hurricane Irene, I think as a manifestation of climate change, sort of, I think we were thinking at the time, again, as broader metaphor. Cortez, the conquistador, Eric Prince, who I don't know if people know Eric Prince. He's, I believe, the owner of Blackwater, kind of a mercenary military contractor.
Custer.
And Custer, General George Custer. Christopher Columbus, Anita Bryant, Andrew Jackson, Pablo Picasso, and Franz Boas. There's Alvarado. We mentioned he would be coming back.
Mr. Burns.
The mountain man there is from cover of a magazine. As we were doing the project, I was at Stop and Shop and turned around and saw this magazine cover, and it seemed fitting. Dave Hickey, for those of you who don't know, the art critic.
And that's Martin Shkreli.
Yeah. And this sort of, brings it into the present. This hadn't happened when we had the show, obviously, but it sort of becomes a kind of extension of the idea.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's the end of our presentation. And we'd love to take questions at this point if you want to put those questions into the chat. I was also going to play some of the digital animations while the Q&A is happening. How does the iPad scanner work? Essentially, it's like a scanning device that clips onto an iPad, and it uses the camera on the iPad as the photogrammetry device. And so as you basically hold the iPad and have to slowly move around the object, and it takes hundreds, maybe thousands of pictures, all sort of collapsed into a composite in the form of a 3D object file.
There's a question in the chat. Can you speak about the color and texture choice behind your text pieces? They seem to have a patina. That kind of greenish color. Oh, do you have the animations, Martin?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the greenish color was actually the palette I was using for my paintings at the time.
Sorry, wrong video. Okay, another question for both Martin and Dwayne. Do either of you feel like you have encountered a Wendigo in your lives? Ooh, I like that question. Dwayne, you want to go first?
An actual Wendigo, I don't know. If you're talking about the metaphor, yes. But the kind of the image of the kind of fantastical creature, no, for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're speaking metaphorically, it becomes something that, you recognize as part of a broader kind of cultural affliction, and something that in many ways we're all sort of working against in various ways. And the impulses within our culture to consume excessively are often hard to resist. And so I feel like it's at least speaking for myself, it's become something that's at least being aware of this metaphor and this legend has made me more conscious of the ways that I have to sort of recognize my own susceptibility to that.
One of the things that Jonathan Buffalo discussed was the idea that, I mean, for him, the fear was genuine, that as a human being, he could, he has all the vulnerabilities of a human being, and he could, as a human being, slip into, some form of some state, such as the Wendigo, or fall, have his life fall out of balance. And I think that's that idea that, a life out of balance was I think that was for him his biggest concern.
From Vicky, do the objects at the Haffenreffer ever get loaned out to other museums or institutions? I believe so, yes.
Mhm. Depends on the objects.
On the objects, yeah.
Yeah.
Esteban asks, are you archiving technology as a way to possibly democratize and therefore possibly address historical injustices in some way, or does the virtual archiving of museum collection further push the narrative of cultural disconnect as objects enter the digital void? It's a great question. I'm not sure we have a concrete answer. I mean, I think our impulse to use the scanning initially, well, it was part of the sort of mission of the grant, and also it was a practical sort of decision. But I think it transforms the objects in very, in some ways unsettling ways. However, it also kind of reactivates them in others. And if the museum context of the archive functions to deactivate them, perhaps reactivating them even in this way is a way to sort of make them more accessible and make them more broadly available. I don't know. What do you think, Dwayne?
Sorry, I was reading someone. We had another question here. Is the virtual archiving of a museum collection further? The disconnect is always going to be there, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. The disconnect is always there.
These objects, are, yes, they're divorced of some of their context, some of their history. They're deactivated, and probably never again to actually be within their original context. So yeah, there's always, is that the narrative? The narrative of disconnect.
Craig Hill asks, for the piece Wendigo, would you consider allowing the community or audience at other institutions to choose the names of their particular Wendigos? The choice in work as it is currently has a number of political and artistic Wendigos, and I would be curious as to how these choices would change with different audiences. That's a great idea.
You mean like an audience participation type situation?
Yeah. But then it becomes, well, I don't know.
Well, there's, regional Wendigos, right?
Sure.
New England probably has its Wendigos.
Yeah.
What artistic plans do you have for the future of the scans?
I think it would be, I've thought about this in different ways, but it might, it'd be, we've sort of discussed what if we were to do the show in another location or in another place. It does allow the exhibition to move in different places, but as far as these particular scans, I think this is how they are intended to exist, at least in this show.
Yeah, the museum itself didn't actually even ask us for copies. So,
are the text paintings on view somewhere?
No. Let's see. Oh, I'm in my studio. No, they're here. And possibly, they may go to the show I'm having at the Aldrich Museum in January. The curators and I haven't quite figured out, selected what we're going to show?
We never really explained, but somebody had asked about the texture in the text paintings. You could sort of explain its relationship to the screens, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
So yeah, because that texture is made using stencils we made using the same window screen that's used for the hanging screens. So there's sort of parallel in the.
Yeah, we for our first collaboration, we started making some text paintings, and yeah, for me it's a technique on loan from Martin.
But you've done things with it I never would have.
Okay.
But it is an example of collaboration, I think, one of the creative collaborations. Any other questions?
Okay.
No? Okay.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank everybody for attending. I hope it was interesting. Hope you were able to learn a little bit more about our collaboration, and maybe learn something new.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, spending some time with us tonight.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining us. We hope that you'll join us next Thursday, April 16th, 6 p.m. Eastern. Jacoby Satterwhite will be joining us. Hope to see you then. Thanks again.